cut out for me. You just had a really good meal, and I know what happens after you eat a really good meal. Reminds me of the lady whose husband always fell asleep Sunday morning during the sermon. And it really embarrassed her, and so she decided she was going to fix him once and for all. So she had this plan. She cut an onion in half, put half of it in a plastic bag, stuck it in her purse. And then when the sermon began and her husband got comfortable and began to doze off like he always did, here was the plan. She came out with the onion and she stuck it up under his nose. But it backfired on her because in his half awake, half asleep stupor, in the middle of the sermon, he yelled out, "Ethel, get your feet off my pillow." Well, I know I have my work cut out for me, so I hope you can hang with me. I appreciate the invitation, but I also appreciate the accommodating my schedule. When Charles first asked me to come, I said yes. And then after that time, some really good opportunities in Nigeria and Ghana came up. I really needed to go. I only got back Thursday night, and so I asked to be put a little later in the program in case I would needed some sleep. And turns out I didn't. I've been awake since 4:30, but I appreciate it. But I think it's going to work out really well because what I'm going to be talking about today, I think is going to tie together and give some real practical applications to some of the things that have already been said today. By the way, I'm the director of international studies at Bear Valley Bible Institute in Denver. And I brought some brochures if you want to know more about what we're doing. One of the courses that I teach in the preacher training schools is comprehensive leadership. And so we currently have 40 preaching schools around the world in 27 different countries with an enrollment now pushing around 1,000 students. And I was in Nigeria and Ghana looking at visiting 4 existing schools, but also doing the survey work for 4 more possible new schools. And it is a great work. We're trying to empower them, embolden them wherever in those countries to reach and teach their own people, their own language and their own culture, help as many people as can get to heaven. And if you're interested, you can, in some of these schools, because of the format, the way we have structured things, a person or an individual or a congregation can fully fund a preacher training school for about $100 a week. And so if you or your congregation are interested, there's some information here, and I can talk more with you about it later on. But now going back to the reason I'm here is talk about men. Let's see, men to leaders. That's the topic that I've been given. So we've been talking about how to, boys to men, and some of the practical applications regarding leadership. But now what I want to talk about for just a few minutes today is there's mine. I can see it there too. That's nice. I want to talk about how we can really make this happen, because if you are a leader, and I assumed I was going to be talking to some who are already in some leadership position, one of the responsibilities of all leaders is to produce other leaders. John Maxwell says success without a successor is failure. And one of the things we find in some of the countries where we've been invited to help them train preachers is you have this generation of preachers at a certain age, and then one day they realize, wow, we're all getting old. Who's going to fill our shoes? And then they reach out to us and say, please help us train the next generation of preachers. And what needed to have been done all along was an intentional training of those to come. And we find that in quality leaders, in successful leaders. Now, this is the month of August. You know what's going to happen in about 2 weeks from today? I think it's 2 weeks from today, maybe 2.5 weeks. You know what's going to happen? The start of college football.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm pretty happy about that. In fact, because I travel so much during the fall, especially spring and fall, I miss a lot of the games. And that's one of the biggest sacrifices I make for the kingdom, is I don't get to watch all the football I want. But I want to share with you just something from that world. I don't know if you can, how well you can see that. But this is the coaching tree of Bill Walsh. Now, if you're an NFL fan, you'll remember that name, Bill Walsh. And I don't know how well you can read that up there, but every one of those names that you see around there is a person who was at one time one of his assistants, who went on to be a head coach, and in many cases, a championship head coach. And what all of them have in common is their mentor was the same man. So not only was Bill Walsh himself a successful coach and won several Super Bowls, he also produced Super Bowl caliber coaches. That tells you he was a great leader. He wasn't just a great coach, he was a great leader. Now some of you would rather talk about this guy, the Nick Saban coaching tree. And while I'm not a fan necessarily of the school that he represents, I can respect that he has done very much the same thing. In fact, has been a mentor to the head coach of my favorite team, the Georgia Bulldogs. We loaned him Kirby Smart for a few years, and I appreciate everything that Kirby learned from him. And it's now time we got him back, and it's also time that Kirby learns how to beat him. But you can see, again, I don't know how well you can see all this, but these are head coaches, some of them national championship coaches, who all served under him, and they learned something from him. That's what good leaders do. You see, good leaders make other people into leaders. That's what we need to be doing in the church as well, especially. And some of us who are in leadership positions, we need to be more intentional about it. And this is not just a men thing. This is a Christian thing. In some ways, my wife is a leader among the women and the children at the Prattville congregation where we attend. I'll give you just one example before we get into the meat of the lesson. We had a VBS last month, and they needed some people to work with registration. There was this one lady who's a good woman and always attends, but she never really had a job to do. And my wife thought about her and asked her if she would help with registration. You know, this is one of the things that Barnabas did. He got other people involved. And he went to Tarsus and he found Saul and got him started in mission work. The greatest missionary ever got his start in mission work because Barnabas went and got him involved. That's what good leaders do. And this woman, not only, she did two things. She said, yes, I'd be happy to. And the second thing she said was, thank you for asking me. Yeah. You see, sometimes we forget about that. It's the same people always doing the same thing. What we need to be doing is being a lot more intentional about getting other people involved and helping them develop into the leaders that they can possibly be as well. But how do you do that? How do you get people off the sidelines? How do you turn shirkers into workers? That's going to be our focus for a few minutes this afternoon. First of all, we're going to make 4 practical points. The first thing we have to do, if we're going to turn shirkers into workers, is we have to make the right assumptions about others. Now, I make that point with the assumption that we make assumptions. And we do sometimes. In fact, sometimes the assumption we make is, they've never done that before. I don't think they would want to do that. Just made an assumption. We make assumptions, okay? I think that's a given. What I'm saying is, we need to make the right assumptions about people. And that will help them. Let me give you at least 3 assumptions that you can make about everybody. You can make these 3 assumptions about everybody, and they will be right. The first one is you need to know that everyone wants to feel worthwhile. Every person you know, every person you meet is hungry for something. Recognition, companionship, love, understanding, all of the above. Everyone is hungry for something, and everyone wants to feel worthwhile. And no matter who that person is, where they are from, or even what the perceived image that they would project is, guaranteed, everybody wants to feel worthwhile. And my point is, people will follow a leader who makes them count, who makes them feel worthwhile. If you want to be a better leader about making other leaders, you need to know that people will follow a leader who makes them feel worthwhile. Because everybody wants to feel that way. One of the greatest leaders in the history of the world is Napoleon Bonaparte. Undoubtedly one of the greatest leaders. And some have studied what was his secret, what was his key. It certainly wasn't his stature, right? They said that those who knew him, he said he would walk through the camps where his army was. And he would, here he is, the grand poobah, the general of the whole thing, but he would stop and talk to each man. And he would ask him, where are you from? Where's your hometown? Tell me about your family. What's your wife's name? And the next time he saw them, he would ask about their family and maybe even about that wife by name. And it made each one of them feel like they mattered. And because of that, they would fight to the end of the world for him. And we need to remember that. Everybody wants to feel worthwhile. We're not talking about manipulation, we're talking about motivation. What's the difference between manipulation and motivation? I think every leader has to wrestle with that and struggle with that. Here's my definition. Manipulation is where I'm trying to get you to do what I want you to do. Whereas motivation is I'm trying to help you do what you need to do. We're not trying to manipulate. But we do need to realize that if we're going to lead others, we have to understand, we have to assume they want to feel worthwhile, and they will follow someone who makes them feel that way. We see that, don't we, in society? Why do people join gangs? Why do people, leadership extends even beyond the things that are good and righteous, doesn't it? Because everybody wants to feel worthwhile. A second assumption that you can make about others that's going to be right, I guarantee you, is that everybody responds to and needs encouragement. Across the board, it's a human nature thing, and even the person that may come across so cocky, they need encouragement and they respond to it. Reggie Jackson was asked one time, what makes a great manager? And he said a great manager has a knack for making ball players think they are better than they think they are. Because everybody needs encouragement and everybody responds to it as well. And those following in our realm of leadership, whatever that is, they need encouragement as well, and they usually respond to it. And so catch your children doing right. When someone has done something good, point that out. When I was in local work for about 20 years before I began working with Bear Valley full time, I made it a practice to regularly try to brag on one person or one group of people every Sunday morning before my sermon. And, being the preacher and being around the building, sometimes I knew things that nobody else knew, but I might say, I just have to let you know this morning, this week I caught Sister Jackson red-handed. Everybody snickers and they look at Sister Jackson, and she was in the fellowship hall cleaning up and cleaning out the refrigerator. Caught her red-handed. Oh, she would, blush and be a little bit shy, but inside, you know what? She wants to clean out the refrigerator again. And you know what? Somebody else is going to say, you know what? I need to do something good too. Because people respond to, they need encouragement and they respond to it. And we need to remember that if we're going to help lead people in the ways that they should go. Another assumption that you can make is that people buy into the leader before they buy into his leadership. It's a fact. All right, and Charles mentioned the Maxwell 5 levels. This is the permission part, where I trust you, we have a relationship, we have a rapport, and therefore I will follow you. And this is the step that most people try to skip. Try to go from step 1 with position to step 3 with production without gaining permission. But I'm telling you, it's a fact. People won't follow you until they trust you, until they know you, until they know you care about them. That's an assumption that everybody can make. In other words, people respond to the person rather than the position. Don't try to skip that step. You want to positively influence others until you have given them loyalty, they won't give it to you. Then people need to believe in their leader, or they will not follow. And so, if you're trying to get people off the sideline, I hope you are, then remember, you have to make the right assumptions about them. A second thing we have to do to turn shirkers into workers is we need to know what motivates people. What motivates people? I like the story about the cowboy. He had one spur. He was wearing one spur. That was it. And somebody said, I have to ask, why are you only wearing one spur? He said, well, I figure if I can get one side of the horse going, the other side will come right along. You know, that's the way motivation is. We get that motivation right, then everything else goes along. But what is it that motivates people? We're all a little bit different, right? But there are some things we all have in common. And one of the things that motivates people is significant contributions. They want to feel like they're making a difference. And I can tell you, for example, I mentioned the schools around the world. There are people who are sacrificing financially because they know what they're doing making a difference for all of eternity. People are willing to do something that they know is making a significant difference because people want to be able to make an impact. Now think about that, especially as it relates to our work in the Lord's church. People want to know they can make a difference. And if you're going to try to help them get off the sideline, you need to know they will respond to, and they want to know that a significant contribution motivates them, that they can actually make a difference. Even in the smallest thing, the two mites can make a difference. But as a leader, you're going to have to make sure that that's understood. And because people won't always recognize that. They might even think that what they're doing doesn't make a difference. But when you can point out that Sister Jackson cleaning out that refrigerator, or Brother Johnson who fixed the heater, and otherwise you'd be freezing this morning, on and on we go. See, it motivates people when they know they're making a difference. Another thing that motivates people is goal participation. If you want a rallying point for a team or a group of people or even for an individual, to have a goal that can be looked forward to and that one can try to achieve, it can really motivate people. There are young men right now, speaking of football, who have been sweating hours and hours today and yesterday and the day before and a few weeks before and then the news to come, all for one goal: to win. What would possess somebody to do all of that? Because they want to win. And people support what they create. If you allow a person to help set the goals, then they will participate in that and to make those goals come about because they want to feel a part. What about in the congregation? Do we have goals? You see, goals can motivate. Now, there are several things about goals that need to be kept in mind, but goal participation builds team spirit and it enhances morale, and it motivates people. If you aim at nothing, you're sure to hit it. Goals motivate. Another thing that motivates is what I call positive dissatisfaction. Positive dissatisfaction. There are those who are always dissatisfied, but in a negative way. But someone has said that dissatisfaction is a one-word definition of motivation. I'm not satisfied with the way it is, and therefore it motivates me to do something about it. And these people see a need for change, and they know that something needs to be done, and it motivates them to do it. How can you, in your leadership realm, create positive dissatisfaction? It's one of the things we have to work out. And it will depend on the situation, it will depend on the individuals, but positive dissatisfaction motivates. Another thing that motivates people is recognition. I pointed out that a little bit by the thing that I used to do and trying to point out what people, when I would point out what someone had done. Because a lot of times in the church what we hear about is what's not being done. You ever heard a preacher talk about, well, I don't know where everybody is tonight, but I guess I'm glad y'all are here. Oh, wow. Oh, just made my heart flutter, didn't it? I mean, you know, why am I talking about who's not here? Let's talk about who is here. Besides that, the people who need to hear that aren't here to hear that. But people are motivated by recognition. And I learned this about myself many, many years ago. I was a teenager, and the boys in the youth group had gotten together on Saturday, and we did some kind of manual labor around the building. I don't know if we pulled weeds or we cut hedges. I don't remember what we did, but we had done this on Saturday. And the next day, on Sunday, we're sitting there, all the youth group sitting together, and the preacher says, "We just want to, thank the young men for doing whatever." And I remember I kind of sat up because I just knew he was about to name the names of the ones who did it. I suddenly sat up, and guess what? He didn't name any names. And I remember feeling a little bit disappointed. I hadn't done it for that reason, but it was an insight into me, and I think it was an insight into myself, and I think an insight into most people is the fact that they are motivated by recognition. And this keeps a person motivated to keep contributing. Point it out, send a note, send a text. We have more ways now than ever before to send little encouraging motivations. Use those, people respond to that. Another thing that motivates people is clear expectations. It's motivating when you know exactly what to do. And when the goals and the expectations and the responsibilities are all clearly understood, then motivation rises. And it motivates people to do what needs to be done, whatever that might be. So we're talking about how can we turn shirkers into workers. And you need to know what motivates people. Those 5 things motivate people. But you also need to know what demotivates people. And I think that's a word. It's a real word and a prefix, and you know what it means. It takes away the motivation. Ever been demotivated? Ever been really just ready to do something, and then something came along and rained on your parade? You were having a zippity-doo-dah day, and suddenly something came and zipped your doo-dah away, and it was suddenly you lost the motivation. Well, for those in leadership positions, we need to know what motivates people, but we also need to be aware of the things that can take away the motivation of others. Let me just suggest for you a few things that will take away motivation, therefore we want to avoid them. One of the things is belittling people. Belittling people or criticizing or making a cutting comment can be something that really takes away the zeal. And you might not even mean it in a negative way. I've had to learn this about myself. I will jokingly make a sarcastic comment. I don't mean it in a harsh way. But that doesn't mean it's not received that way. And so I've had to make sure that I pay a lot more attention to what I say. You can say it about me and I'm not going to be hurt, but that doesn't mean I can say it to you and you won't be either. We need to be careful about these things, and especially we don't want to criticize publicly. The old adage, you praise publicly, you correct privately. So if you're in a leadership position and someone in your group, your team, your whatever, has maybe messed up, has not done it right, or needs to improve, you pull them aside. And you praise publicly and you correct privately. And even constructive criticism can be done in a positive way. The old sandwich approach, you begin with something positive, appreciate you being willing. Now next time you might want to consider doing it this way. I really appreciate you giving it a try. The sandwich method really kind of takes the sting out of the constructive criticism. And that's not going to demotivate somebody, but simply condemning or criticizing or belittling them will. And if you do, don't be surprised that you turn that worker back into a shirker and sent them back off the field onto the sideline where it's nice and safe and nobody has to worry about being criticized. Another thing about motivation, the things that demotivate a person, is manipulating people. Now, I've already touched on what I believe to be the difference between manipulation and motivation. But nobody likes to feel used or manipulated. One church where I used to preach when I first moved there, they had a preacher's house. And they told me that one time the preacher, he was several preachers before me, but he told two teenage boys in the church, and both of those teenage boys were now adults. He said, you know, if y'all come mow my grass, you'll be doing the Lord's work. Yeah, even the teenagers didn't buy that. No. You know, he was just manipulating them, and nobody likes to feel manipulated. Nobody wants to feel that way. And if they begin to even get a hint, I'm just being used, then they're going to lose motivation. And this, because ultimately this tears down the trust. Remember, they buy into the leader before they buy into the leadership. If they decide now they can't trust this person, and that trust is eroded or even destroyed, then they're going to lose any enthusiasm, they're going to lose any motivation that they had once had. And so be careful. You need to not manipulate anyway, because that's the wrong thing to do. But you also need to know that that is one thing that will cause them to lose motivation. One more thing, and that is being insensitive can cause people to lose interest and motivation. If you are in any leadership position, make people your priority. Make people your priority. They are your greatest resource. And in fact, in the church, people are the church. And so they need to be our priority. And so be careful. Be sensitive to their ideas. Be sensitive to their concerns. Be sensitive to their fears. You know, if I don't share a certain fear and someone says it, and I might say, oh, well, that's ridiculous. You don't have to worry about that. Well, that may come across to them as being insensitive. And if I do come across as being insensitive, then I have demotivated them. In fact, I may have completely voided my influence altogether. So be careful. Again, it would not have to be something done intentionally. It would not have to be malicious. But the result could still be the same, in that it would take away their motivation. All right, so one more thing, one more point. How to turn shirkers into workers. How can we as leaders get more people involved in leadership? I'm going to make suggestions that you know how to get others involved. That's ultimately what we're talking about, is getting others involved. But how do you do that? More importantly, do you know how to do that? To help us think about how to know how to get others involved, I want to make 3 suggestions along these lines. First of all, I would say if you want to get others involved, focus on their strengths and then work in their weaknesses. When we assess potential, like Charles was talking about earlier, when we assess potential, it's easy to look at somebody and say, I don't know that they've really got that in them. But there's a strength there somewhere. There's a strength there somewhere. And too many times we look at the whole person and we may see what we perceive to be more weaknesses than strengths, and therefore we say, well, they're probably not the one. But I'm telling you, there is a strength there somewhere. And if we will focus on those strengths, then we will be able to have the confidence we need to try to get them involved. What can they do, not what can't they do? I think that sometimes even on a self-assessment basis, we want to improve our weaknesses, when perhaps we would be even better off just excelling in our strengths. You have some natural strengths, you have some natural weaknesses. Which one of those do you want to focus on? You may actually be better off focusing on your strengths. And the same would be true of others. Utilize their strengths, and then if time and need be, then you can help gradually improve their weaknesses. But do that first. Focus on their strength. Otherwise, you'll make the wrong assumption about them in the first place. A second way to get others involved is to give them ownership. Give them ownership. I mean, make them a real, vital part of the group. This is not some pat on the head. This is not some honorary position. They're a real, vital part of the group, which means we're going to allow them input and we're going to give them responsibility. Be careful, leaders, because leaders oftentimes want to micromanage. I'm going to ask you to do something, and I'm going to look over your shoulder all the time and see if you're doing it exactly the way I would do it. Maybe they want some assistance. But if you're going to truly give them ownership, you're going to have to not be the micromanager. And I'll tell you this, especially as it relates to the church, the hardest people in the world to lead are volunteers. Hardest people in the world to lead are volunteers because they don't have to be led. If you're my employee, you kind of have to do what I say or else you don't get to keep your job. If you're in the army, you're in the military, you have to do what your commander tells you or else things are not going to go so well. But in the church, in the Lord's army, everybody's a volunteer. It's challenging to lead volunteers. If you're in a position of leading volunteers, one of the things you will especially have to do is give them ownership. Booker T. Washington said, "Few things help an individual more than to place responsibility upon him and let him know that you trust him." You won't always get it right, and boy, it's a risk. It's a risk. They could get it wrong. But if you want to really get others involved, you'll have to do that. You have to give them ownership. It works for you, it works for them as well. One more suggestion. We want to get others involved and be successful in turning shirkers into workers. We need to give them every chance for success. What I mean is we need to provide the right atmosphere for them to work in. We need to make sure they have the necessary tools. So many times in the church we want, let's just say our Sunday school teachers, we want them to do a good job, but they don't have the resources. Maybe we don't have a resource room. We don't have the materials, and they're faced with a job to do, but they don't really have every chance for success. We need to provide what is necessary for them to have success. Keep a compelling vision before them, whatever the situation in which your work calls for. Give that person every chance for success. And as they achieve successes, then there's more motivation. Then they begin now to pick up momentum. They begin now to become leaders. And one day they'll get other people involved as well. And the cycle continues. And so, especially in the church, we need to be, those of us in leadership positions need to be much more intentional about bringing along other leaders. What happens, though, a lot of times in the church, we don't do that. We get in our little mode, and I think I was telling you about the generation of preachers, and then suddenly they're all 60 and 70, and one just had this health problem, one just had this one, and suddenly, and I've had them tell me this, we need more. Well, that's true, but that should have been part of the plan the whole time. How many times in the church do we see an eldership that doesn't even think about other elders until suddenly there's a point in the age of the current eldership, and suddenly now, while there's been no preparation, for elders, suddenly now we're looking for elders. And we haven't been trying to prepare them all along. So we could all do a lot better job, couldn't we? Being intentional about raising up other leaders. Success without a successor is failure. And in the Lord's church especially, we need to make sure that we're doing a good job to be intentional about turning shirkers into workers. I hope this is helpful to you. Given the time of day and your current post-lunch condition, I have intentionally been a little bit briefer than I might would have been, but I hope it's helpful to you. And I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Amen.